So we left off with the woman caught in adultery, the pseudo-Johannian text, but it still fits well with John's. Yeah. All right. So now we're on chapter 8, verse 12. Jesus, the light of the world. And of course, light and darkness are very important images in John's gospel. The whole gospel begins in chapter 1 about the light coming into the world and the people did not receive it. So we're going with that theme of light in John's gospel. Verse 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am. All right, so one more I am statement. I remember, well, probably pre-COVID. It's got to be pre-COVID. You know when the Jehovah's Witness come walking in your neighborhood? And they're easy to spot. Yep. All right? And they're going door to door. Whenever that happens in my neighborhood, I quickly grab a rake or something and start raking my front yard.
Yeah. Bring it. Come on. I want to talk to you. You're the only one.
Everybody's got their doors slammed and everything else. And so I'm out there and I'm luring them in. And they come over. And I said, interesting. I got to ask you the question here. Did you grow up Jehovah's Witness? Or did you study all of the different kinds of religions and chose Jehovah's Witness? Did you marry a Jehovah's Witness and now you're just part of the club? Most of the time they are born into it or they've married somebody. They said, you've never really studied this before, have you? Because I can't imagine anybody studying this who would actually say, that's what I believe. They say, what do you mean? I said, for instance, Jehovah's Witness is just a repackaging of 3 ancient heresies. The first one is Gnosticism. So I'll use that one for last. The first one is Pelagianism, which is works righteousness. That you're not a grace-based, it is a works righteousness basis. The second thing is Arianism, which in like 325, this was denying the divinity of Jesus. They don't see Jesus as part of the Godhead. Jesus was the first of creation. But he is not equal with God. And I said the third one is Gnosticism. Because Gnostics have their own secret writings. And I said, for instance, your translation of the Bible is the only translation that you're going to ever use. Call it the World, New World, or something like that. You don't use like an NIV or NLT, or you don't use whatever, RSV. They weren't even sure there were other ones. So then I bring up my Bible that I happen to be having on me while I'm raking my grass in the front yard. And I said, let's go to John chapter 1. I'll read mine and then you read yours. Mine reads, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They read theirs. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. I said, you realize that's the only translation that translates it that way. I can pull out all of the other ones. It's going to be different. And then they get into, I said, what about all those sayings about Jesus saying, if you've seen the Father, you've seen the Son. I and the Father are one. And they counter it by saying that, you got a son? Yeah, I've got a son. Is there a time in which, boy, you've seen Dad, you've seen me, you've seen Dad. Boy, he and I are one in the way that we think about things. That's what Jesus is saying. that he is so aligned with God that they are one in their thought and their, I said, well, maybe. What about all those I am statements? In which, and then I get into this whole, we talked about last time about these I am statements. I said, clearly, even when I got to go back to the origins of that in Exodus chapter 3, clearly, Jesus was making the assumption that he's equal with God. But more importantly, even if this guy didn't know what he was talking about, everyone who heard him would have made that connection, that I and the Father using the holy name of God. And that's typically say, wow, I've got to go for this whole neighborhood here. I don't have time. Or can I have so-and-so call you? Or thank you very much. And they leave on. But what we're seeing here in the 8th chapter, one more time, Jesus using this divine name of God to describe himself. I am the light of the world. Those who follow me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The Pharisees then said to him, you are bearing witness to yourself. Your testimony is not true. Remember, Drew talked about that last week. In a court of law, you can't testify on your own behalf. You need to have at least two witnesses. And so they're saying that this is not enough for just you. 14. Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness to myself, my witness is that testimony is true. For I know where I come from and where I am going, but you don't know where I've come from and where I am going. You judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. And even if I do judge, my judgment is true. I'm not alone. You're all, in 17, here it is. In your law, it is written that the testimony of two people are true. I bear witness to myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness to me. There's two. That's the trump card, you know, as he's playing, boom, right on the table. God bears witness to me. Then they said to him, where's your father?
It's a loaded question, huh?
Isn't it? There are layers to that question.
Where's your earthly father?
Yeah, what's that?
Where's your earthly father, right?
Earthly father. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Time too.
In 19, where's your father? Jesus says, you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father. And that's the text that Jehovah's Witness was talking to. Nathan would say, boy, if you know me, you'd know my dad. If you know my dad, you know me. We're in line. We think alike. We look alike. He's a little taller. But that's what they were saying about the close proximity. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple. But no one arrested him because his hour had not come. John talks almost about this force field that's around Jesus. And this is going to be very important when it comes time for the trial. We're going to pick this up again. The question is, who's in control? Who is in control? Now, Mark's gospel wants you to believe that things just snowballed out of control and Jesus was taken and he was brought before the trial like a lamb in front of the slaughter. But in John's gospel, Jesus remains completely in control. It starts with the wine or water turned into wine. What does that have to do with me, woman? My hour has not come. And now here, they can't do anything with him because his hour, that is his time of glorification, that is the cross, has not yet come.
Good. You know, we'll see that a little throughout the whole, even in John 11 with Lazarus, when they summon, he says, it's not yet time for me to go. That theme keeps coming back up again and again. That's good. Hey, I wanted to go back to something last week that was a question that somebody asked about the two names, Jesus and Christ. I just was curious about that. So I looked it up. I had never heard this before, but evidently in that day, most people had, Jewish people had, They had a Hebrew name that was kind of circle referred them to. And then they had a Greek name.
Well, Peter and Cephas, Paul
Peter
and Saul.
Paul and Saul, Thomas and Didymus, the twin, Tabitha and Dorcas in Acts. And so I just thought that was interesting that, remember it's this tiny Jewish minority, but they're in this vast Greek culture. And so in order to relate to the Greek world around them, they would have had this kind of Greek name to go by too. But Jesus, his is Christos, the Messiah, the anointed one. So I guess Paul maybe had that in mind.
But that article isn't one Hebrew and one Greek?
Right.
Like Paul and Saul, Dorcas and Tabitha.
Yeah.
But Jesus and Christ are both
Greek. So I guess it'd be the Yeshua, the original, what he would have been known to as Yeshua. Jesus is our kind of Greek version of that, right? Yeah, the Yeshua, Joshua. But, anyways, I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, so, another thing with John I'm noticing here is Jesus is increasingly making claims about himself and who he is. And it's going to culminate at the very end of this chapter where he says something that would have completely infuriates the people that are listening to him. We'll get there, but he's building that up and is starting by talking about being the light. And here he refers to himself as being from above and then from below, that they're of this world, but he's not of the world. And so he's pointing that out. That look down to verse 28. When you've lifted up the Son of Man, then you'll know that I am the one I claim to be. And that I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me. One of the ways Jesus is pointing to the truthfulness of his identity, a couple things. One, he says, I'm not trying to glorify myself. Nothing about what I'm saying is trying to promote me. I'm pointing to God the Father. And so if I were just trying to draw people, to make myself look good, that would be a sign. Another thing, he says, look at my fruits. When they're picking up stones to condemn him, he says, what have I done? I've healed the sick, I've driven out demons, I've turned water into wine. Which of these things are you angry with me about? It's not because of what you've done, it's because of what? What you're saying, your word. That's what we're upset with. And he's saying, well, my word is going to be verified when I'm lifted up. Eventually, you'll know. The one who has sent me, verse 29, is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. There's this emphasis on obedience. Jesus is the Son of God. He's perfectly obedient to the law. All 600 plus laws, Jesus fulfills them perfectly. That's why when he says to the crowd, what have I done for which you're stoning me? I've not broken any of the laws. Count them, number them. I've upheld all of them. And verse 30, even as he spoke, many put their faith in him. How? Because he's speaking. How is faith created? Paul talks about that out of the word creates faith. And here you have the word itself speaking, creating this saving faith and coming to believe in him. Now look down at 31. One of the patterns in John that we've looked at so far is Jesus says X, and the people hear Y. And Jesus has to lead them to see what he's really talking about. So think back to John chapter 3 with Nicodemus. What was Jesus talking about where Nicodemus completely misunderstood him?
Be born again.
Born again. How can I climb back in my mother's womb? Number 2, then you come to the Samaritan woman. Sir, give me a drink. If you knew you were talking to, you asked me, and I would give you a drink. Well, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Jesus is talking about this. She's thinking this, living water, and Jesus has to help her come to see. So now in John 8, we have another example of that. Jesus is saying to the people of Israel, if you hold to my teaching, you'll really be my disciples, my students, the ones who are being shaped by me. You know, almost every rabbi would have their disciples who were a carefully chosen group, usually the cream of the crop who would follow them. Then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you what?
Free.
Free. All right, so here's our X. Jesus is talking about freedom. But they don't hear it the way he's hearing, he's implying. They look at each other and go, wait a minute. One of the points of pride for us as Israel is that we have had people from the Babylonians to the Assyrians to the Greeks, now to the Romans, who have said that they're our masters. But inwardly, we know the truth. We have never really submitted to them. They think they're running the show. But little do they know our heart has never given them true allegiance. So when they say back to Jesus, we're Abraham's descendants, we've never been slaves of anyone, I think one way they mean that is authentically. Look, we know we've never submitted to these powers. And we've been free, even though physically they've been dominated for much of their history. And Jesus says, I'm not talking about outward freedom. I'm talking about freedom of the spirit. That you have, you're not bound to do what you don't want to do, what you know is going to destroy your heart and your life. And what Jesus says, I tell you the truth, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. And Paul gets into this a lot in the book of Romans and other places in the New Testament, where when he talks about sin, he talks about it as something that it becomes something that you can't not do. It's a form of slavery, and that no matter how hard you might try to break that, you can't. In fact, the sinful condition that we have as human beings, we know what's going to hurt us, but we want to do it anyways at times, which is kind of the crazy part about it. That you're going to be bound to that, unable to break out of it. And another claim Jesus makes in verse 35 is about saying, if you do that, you're a slave, and a slave has no permanent place in the family. But who am I? I'm a son. Son belongs to it forever. The slave can be put out at any time. They can be dismissed or told they're no longer allowed to be there. But the son has that permanent place. Jesus wants to help them see a new meaning of freedom. And, I think today that is a really, that's today a really relevant thought or question people have. Why do I need religion? What I need for freedom is just to pursue my best life now, to pursue my best self. And the painful part of that is it can end up making you more of a slave than you were before. I know you're Abraham's descendants, Jesus says, yet you're ready to kill me because you have no room for my word. Which is, Abraham is all about life. He's the father of the nations. And so Jesus is pointing out this contrast between Abraham, who's the father of nations and giver of life, and their desire to kill Jesus. I tell you what I've seen in the Father's presence. You do what you've heard from your father. Abraham is our father, they answered. And so Jesus is going to point out, if you were, then you would do the same things that he did. Go back to Genesis, when God chooses Abraham. What is it that makes Abraham righteous? Remember? When God says, credits Abraham righteousness.
Faith.
It's his faith. Yeah. When God gives him the promise of being this father of the nations, it says, look at the stars and you can count them. That's how many descendants you'll have. He says, by your faith, before Abraham acts, that the righteousness is given to him. And Martin Luther's going to grab onto that later and say, that's the earliest evidence we have that we're saved by faith and not by works. Because Abraham, he moves forward with faith first. And the people who are claiming to be Abraham's descendants, what they don't have here is faith. That they're not seeing that Jesus is who he says he is. Moreover, they're trying to kill him, who's told the truth in verse 40 that I heard from God. Abraham did not do such things, but you're doing the things your own father does. Now, here's going back to what that loaded question was before. We are not illegitimate children, they protested. So there's two ways to hear that. One, that they are saying, we know we're descendants of Abraham, and there was a belief too, because of they're born into the family, that they're going to be accepted no matter what. And they're saying, on the one hand, we know, we can trace, I can tell you which tribe my family comes from, going back to the 12 tribes of Israel. But I think the other layer of that statement is those murmurs still.
Murmur.
Yeah, about Jesus potentially having been an illegitimate child. And nobody really thinks the Virgin from Nazareth, Mary, really was conceived by the Holy Spirit. Just the contrary, they made this story up, and that's haunted Jesus in some ways up to this point. The only Father we have is God Himself.
Then he calls him the devil, verse 24.
Right.
Now we're getting into some name calling. I mean, when they ask the question, "Who's your father?" Snicker, 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 because we know that you're an illegitimate child. And then Jesus, when they're talking about who is the true legitimate heir, he calls them the devil's children. Go down a little bit further here. And 47, he was of God, hears the word of God. The reason why you do not hear them is that you are not of God. See, you're godless. See the name calling back and forth, and they're not done with that. Boy, you call us that, we're going to call you the next of the worst name in the book, verse 48. The Jews answered him, are we not right in saying that you're a Samaritan? That's not a compliment. Not a compliment. And you're not only a Samaritan, but you also have a demon. I'm not a demon. I honor my Father, you dishonor me. I don't seek my own glory. Verse 51. Now, you and I can understand how the people can take offense at Jesus. 51. Truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never die. This is clearly of the devil, bypassing the death stage. 52, the Jews said to him, how we know that you do have a demon? Abraham died. You see all this, it's all about trying to legitimize, because you heard a lot about him trying to be greater than Moses. I'm feeding you. Now, is it greater than Abraham? Yes, greater than Abraham. And now, how much greater than Abraham? Here, this is really interesting here. Now we know you're a demon. Abraham died. 53. Are you greater than our father Abraham? There's a right answer, and there's a wrong answer. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died? And the prophets, who do you claim to be? Jesus answered, if I glorify myself. Go down a little bit further here. 56. Who do you claim to be? Your father Abraham rejoiced that he was to see my day. He saw it and he was glad. What? Because they just said Abraham was the greatest. And Abraham died, and Jesus saying, yeah, but he was able to see my day. And we go on just a little bit further, 57. The Jews then said to him, what? You're not yet 50 years old. You've seen Abraham? And 58. Here again, he's using the holy name of God. 58. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, he could have said, what it would have made sense to say, before Abraham was, I was. Like I've been around before Abraham. Before Abraham was, I was, but he doesn't say that. Before Abraham was, I am. So they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. The name calling, the animosity, much more than the other gospels. Jesus really holds his own in John's gospel. Very blatant. Of course, the theology now has matured, has evolved. This is not a strict biology. Jesus did this, and then he did that, and then he did this. This is more of a theological than a biographical. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Drew in chapter 9, but before I do so, Jesus is talking to people who are in the dark. That is, they absolutely, these are the ones who should have known. They should have figured it out. They should have faith. They should be people who are in the light. But they're not. They're in the dark, right? The next chapter, John juxtaposes the ones who should be able to see, but they don't, with the one who should not be able to see, but he does. Chapter 9.
Just going to get you in the corner of the picture here. Not to eat it, just right there. I'm gonna go get me some food too.
All right. You know what I appreciate about John is with this really very spiritual language and themes, he does interject those details like, but this happened in the temple court where the treasury was, or later we'll see that in the next chapter. But Jesus was walking in Solomon's colonnade and it was winter time. It's like, but I want you to remember that this is historical too, like,
right.
Giving us those. That's cool. He includes that. As one person, C.S. Lewis once said, the great writer, that he was a study of, in his day job, he was a study of myths and literature. And he said, those people who say that Christianity is a myth haven't read enough myths. It's so grounded in, the Gospels are all grounded in these historical details, which are really powerful. Sorry, you set up 9 so well, and then I took it on.
You whiffed. All right, go ahead.
I'll
try it again. The people who should be able to see don't see, but the people who shouldn't are not seeing are able to
see. There we go.
There's a bad pitch.
There was a common belief in Judaism that if you were living a life of comfort, of success, of power, of popularity, that was a clear indication that you were living righteously. And there was a belief as well that if you were diseased, sick, poor, struggling, that was a clear indication you were not living righteously, at least in some way. There's a cause and effect. And the whole book of Job that Pastor Scott referenced on Sunday deals a lot with that kind of thinking. In Job's pushback on that, I've done nothing wrong, Lord, and here I am. That whole cause and effect idea that was so prevalent in Judaism, the Bible itself pushes back on that, which really is an important point. When the disciples are walking along, chapter 9, verse 1, and he sees a man born blind from birth. What's the problem with that? If he's born blind from birth,
who sinned?
Yeah.
Who sinned? What could he have done if our theology says that he's brought this on himself for potentially. Did he do this? Or like certain passages in the Old Testament that talk about the consequences for the sin will be carried generation after generation, did his parents or the generations before him do something that has now caused this man to be born blind? Jesus answers that question. Verse 3, neither this man nor his parents sinned. In other words, this kind of thinking that your suffering has to mean that you or this person by you, your parent, that they're the reason for that, is deeply flawed. There's a lot of, now of course, as Pastor Scott said too, there are consequences for certain sin, but it's not that simple and cut and dry. But Jesus says, this happens so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. That Jesus is going to use this part of broken humanity as a way of showing that God is the healer, that God can do all things. Here again, playing off the theme of light and darkness. As long as it's day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. Again, not pointing to the daylight and the dark time, the nighttime, but the time of spiritual life, of seeing the Son of Man, versus the time of him not being present in this way, and the time of his suffering at the cross and the passion. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Who's going to become the light of the world when he's not in the world? We are. You know, and Jesus says that much in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5. You are the light of the world. You know, or let your light so shine before others. That the whole reason Jesus came and establishing the church was that it would continue to be his body shining his light in the world. But for now, the church is still in formation. He is the light of the world. He sees this man there. They've had this question about the theology, the spiritual life behind it, and Jesus takes action. Reaches down, gathers some mud, and then spits into it. Which apparently was a common form of medicine back in the day, that healers would do this. And, so why would he embrace that same practice of healing people the way that the average medicine man would? You know, there are different thoughts on that. One is that he's showing this image of creation. What did God do in Genesis? He took the dirt of the earth and breathed into it and brought new life. You know, Jesus is, but he's making this paste, puts it on the man's eyes, and then says, go down to the pool of Siloam, which meant sent. This went way back to the days of King Hezekiah in the Old Testament, that Jerusalem has got this wall around it. But the only problem is if an enemy would come up, they would lay siege to Jerusalem, and the people had one huge problem. Namely, they didn't have any water. If there was a siege around, they didn't have a water source. So the pool of Siloam was basically a stone cistern that was built so that they could get water in the event of a siege. So that word sent was because the water was sent from there, but there's also a cool kind of evangelism component to this. I think John's playing off of that and telling us the detail, because what's this gentleman going to do? He's going to be sent to be a witness to what this man is doing to him. And we're going to see how this guy goes from calling Jesus first a man to something else, finally to a confession of faith. So go down to the pool of Siloam. He went and washed, then he came home seeing. Some pretty powerful, baptismal reference, imagery, symbolism kind of hidden in that too. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging said, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claim that he was. Must have been hard not to have known him. That he's been here since birth, sitting and. But you wonder, why was he, maybe he's an adult now and his parents weren't able to support him any longer. For some reason, he's begging here. Others say, no, he only looks like him. There's no way he could be the one that's now looking back at us. But he insists, I am the man. How then were your eyes open, they demanded. The man they called Jesus. Not the teacher, not the Son of God, not the Messiah. The man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes, and told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I could see. How often, if we talk about our faith, why are you a Christian? Why do you follow Jesus? Well, your own experience. Of course, this is where the great hymn of Amazing Grace, some of the inspiration. I once was blind, but now I see. John Newton, right? References this story there. Where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said. So they bring him to the Pharisees, the man who had been blind. Now, on the day in which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was, dun dun dun, the Sabbath. Oh, man.
Oh, that's a mess.
Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. And that, we've already talked about this a little bit, how much of a stumbling block that is for the early Jewish leaders, that Jesus, he healed people all week, but when he does heal on the Sabbath, it becomes an opportunity for Jesus to talk about what is the real purpose of the Sabbath. Not that you would gain righteousness just by not doing the smallest acts of work, but that it would be about a day of being in relationship with God, and that you would have time for cultivating that friendship with the Lord. But it's become such a legalistic thing with the Sabbath that even though this man supposedly has been healed, they can't see the goodness of that. They're so focused on following the letter of the law. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not for God, for he does not keep the Sabbath in their understanding. Others asked, how can a sinner do such miraculous things? So they were divided. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he is a what? A prophet. Now he's moved from just calling Jesus a man, but he's maybe had time to think about this experience. He knows about the prophets of the Old Testament and how close they walk with God. He's a prophet. There's something about this man that's different. They still didn't believe in him, that he had been blind and received his sight, until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son? They asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? We know he's our son, the parents said, but we know he's born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself. One of the common things that's happening by the time John writes his gospel is people faced an incredibly difficult choice, Jewish people, if they had begun to be believers in Jesus. They could either claim him as Son of God, as Messiah, the crucified one who they believed had come back, we believed had come back to life, and face a devastating result. That they would be put out of the synagogue, which is like excommunication times 10. Your whole life revolves around the synagogue. You can't be a Jewish person, or so it was thought, without being part of the festivals and the reading of Torah and all those elements. But by the time John's writing his gospel, that's what's happening. And these parents, I think, kind of represent that fear of, we know that if we say he is the healer or the Messiah, they'll be put out of the synagogue. Even it says here, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, verse 22. For already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. So even in Jesus' own lifetime, that was happening to an extent. That's why they said, he is of age, ask him. The second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner. These are the ones, as Pastor Scott said, these are the ones who we're supposed to see. Like Nicodemus, you're a teacher of Israel. You should know these things. And yet, you can't see. I think when John's gospel talks a lot about this theme of judgment, that's what it's getting at. On the one hand, Jesus will say, as we just read a previous chapter, I don't judge anyone. But on the other hand, he'll say things like, for judgment, I have come into this world. How can both be true? How can he say, well, I don't judge anyone, but at the same time say, for judgment, I've come into the world? Because he's not the one judging. We judge ourselves by our reaction to him. That if you see Jesus, who embodies the way of love and grace and mercy over sacrifice, and you reject him, what have you done? You've judged yourself. You've condemned yourself, turning away from that way of the divine life. He's not judging you. He's not closing you out. But your own heart, your own judgment of him brings about that blindness. Second time they summoned him, give glory to God, we know this man's a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. An honest answer. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. He's pointing to the spiritual form of seeing. And how does that come? Not by reading it in a book, not by having a great Sunday school teacher. It comes by Jesus personally being present in your life and showing you that he's alive and that he is the healer. When you think about your own journey of faith, in times where you were bound, blind, and cut off, you felt, and yet he brought change and hope. That's where you stand with this person. We all do, and say, all I know is now I see. And they continue to drive it further in.
Okay. So this blind guy first calls him a man, builds up, and then says, no, he's a prophet. And I love this next line here, where at verse 26, they said to him, so what did he say to you? How did he open your eyes? I mean, they have already cross-examined him. I love this it's a little bit of sarcasm in here, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
He answered, I've told you already, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become a disciple? They are incensed.
Hurled insult.
Yeah.
Insult, yeah.
No, you might be a disciple. We're a disciple of Moses. We don't know where he comes from, and so we know that God does not listen to sinners. So they're really in a quandary. They know that he was blind and not seeing. They know that he did it on the Sabbath. They don't like any of it. They're pretty convinced that he's a sinner, and yet God has healed through him. And so they're really at a quandary there. 32. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man who's been blind. If this were not of God, he could do nothing. You can see how this argument rationale goes, right? They answered him, you were born into utter sin and you would teach us? And they cast him out. That's part of that. When Drew talked about the casting out, the excommunication from the synagogue, certainly that was a huge spiritual, what a hardship. I can't worship in the synagogue. And then it's also a huge social thing. You've been cast out, but it's also a huge economic, because now they're not going to do business with you. And most of these towns were small little towns, tradesmen selling your crop, everything else. And if you've been kicked out, nobody wants to do business with you or hang out with you or anything else. So it is really isolating. You could see the tension that they were working on. And now they've kicked out this guy as well. 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out and were having found him. Do you believe in the Son of Man? He said, and who is he, sir, that I may believe him? Jesus said, you have seen him, and it is he who speaks to you. He said, Lord. Okay, one more bumped up. Man to prophet to Lord. And then the next line, and he worshiped. Again, that's crossing a line. It could have said, and he followed him, or he believed in him, or he became a disciple of him. But to say that he worshiped him is clearly crossing that line. This man can't go back after that. Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, i.e., this blind man. And those who see may become blind, i.e., the Pharisees. Some of the Pharisees near heard this, and they said to him, are we blind? Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains. You know, you see the logic there. Boy, if you understand and you say no, then your sin is always with you. If you never understood and can't see, you can't be held accountable. But now you are. And now Jesus gets into chapter 10, which is very common or very well known, the Good Shepherd discourse. Of course, the whole shepherd imagery is so strong throughout the Old Testament. Oftentimes, God is called the shepherd. And the people of God in the Old Testament are the sheep. So Jesus continues in that same imagery. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in through another way is a thief or a robber. That makes sense, right? So at night, you would, of course, get your sheep into this pen. And if you're the owner, you go through the main door. If not, you hop the fence. But he's going to be talking now about the voice of the shepherd. I mean, maybe you could, you've done this too with your children, that you can hear their cry, you can hear their voice. I've got this whistle that I do, that if the kids, I remember when they were younger, maybe at a festival or a fair, and they're way ahead, and we're going in this direction, I got this whistle, and they're like two mercats. Yeah. Their heads go out, and they look around, say, this way. Yeah. And there's a whole crowd of people, but they could hear that one little whistle. So that's what Jesus is going to be getting at here. Verse 3. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Now, evidently, what do I know about sheep? What I read, translations and interpretations. Evidently, what happens, and maybe somebody else has another explanation. Evidently, what happens is that during the day you're out, you've got your sheep out there, Joe's got his sheep out there, Sam's got his sheep out there, but at night there's a common pen. Now, during the day, you're talking to your sheep all day. You're singing to them. David had a harp. He was playing to them. They know your voice. But at night, to keep them protected, you put them in this big collective pen. And then in the morning, comes up and says, come over this way, or however you call sheep. I don't know how you call sheep. But evidently, the sheep separate themselves, and they follow the voice of the shepherd. Anybody else have an experience with sheep? So you can't prove me wrong in that one, right? Good.
Only from Ben.
Only one?
Movie Ben. Yeah, Babe could lead them out.
Babe could lead them out.
Make them do their thing.
So that's what Jesus is getting at here. Verse 5. A stranger they will not follow.
Yeah.
They'll flee from him. They don't know the voice of the stranger.
Should get some sheep.
What's that? Oh.
Sorry.
Verse 7. So Jesus again said, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door. So not only is he the good shepherd, but now he is that door to the pen. He is the door. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not heed them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he'll be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief only comes to steal, destroy. I came, this is such a great line. This one should be underlined, highlighted. I came that they may have life, not just life. What kind of life?
To the full.
Abundant life. Abundant life. 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Wow. What other story can you think about in the Old Testament that the shepherd was protecting his sheep so much that he could have laid down his life?
David.
Nathan?
David.
Said David.
I was thinking David, you know,
He
when,
said David.
yeah? I was
That's what he
thinking,
said. I heard.
did he?
David
I was thinking
said
about
he said
David when he said that a lion attacked and a bear attacked. And I don't know, maybe sheep are more endearing to David than they are to me, but I'm not sure if I'd stick around taking on a lion and a bear for a bunch of sheep. But here is Jesus talking about the same thing. A good shepherd would lay down his life. Verse 12, in comparison, the hireling, who's the hireling? Not the shepherd. He sees a wolf coming, he'll run away. So the hired help, they're not going to stick around. But the one who owns them. 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, they all know me. As the Father knows me and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. Now, verse 16. What is Jesus referring to right now? Up to this point, of course, there's a really strong connection because the Old Testament, the people of God are often called the sheep. God is called the shepherd. Verse 16, and I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will heed my voice. So it'll be one flock, one shepherd.
Gentiles.
Think of the Gentiles, maybe?
Believers? Believers?
Yeah, the believers were probably not Jewish. So the Gentiles, he's probably now talking about, these are sheep outside of the traditional fold. And that's now beginning to expand into the Gentile world. For this reason, the Father loves me, that I lay down my life, that I may take it up again. Little hint of the resurrection there, huh? And lest you think again that Jesus is some suffering, a suffering when it's out of control, a victim of circumstances. Verse 18. Now, of course, the synoptics don't ever put it this way, but 18. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have power to lay it down. I have power to take it up. And this charge I have received from my Father. This is the plan from the foundations of the earth. A plan that comes from the Father, which Jesus comes from the Father. So this cross is not an accident. It's not an unfortunate event. But now they're still having the debate. Now there was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many said, he's got a demon, he's mad. Why listen to him? Yes, if Jesus wasn't who he claimed to be, that's your natural conclusion. Others said, these are not the sayings of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? He has really thrown them into a quandary. But more than that, what's happening at this point in John's gospel is that lines are being drawn. You're either for them or against them. As Drew was mentioning, this was the time in which the Jews were now kicking Christians out of the synagogue. A line is being drawn. Are you willing to stand on the side of Christ or not? And among the Pharisees, the ones whose eyes who should be opened, who should understand, are you going to profess what Jesus claims, or are you not? This is why in John's gospel, there's such a dichotomy all the time. There's light and there's darkness. There's life and there's darkness. You're either part of the sheep or you're not part of the sheep. Up to this point, with the synoptics, the Jews and the Christians were really worshiping side by side. But now the lines have been drawn. Verse 22 is the feast of the dedication. What's the feast of the dedication? Do you remember? Happened about 167 BC.
Hanukkah.
Yep. This is the rededication. It should be called the feast of the rededication after Antiochus Epiphanes polluted, desecrated the temple. They rededicated, and of course Hanukkah is the result of that. And here it is, steeped in history, as you mentioned, Drew. He was walking in the cool of the afternoon on the portico of Solomon, okay? Don't you love this, 24? And the Jews gathered around him and said, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, tell us.
Right.
What? How much more do I have to say? How many more divine names of God must I need to claim? How many more people do I need to heal? It's like after the resurrection, he gathers with his believers in Galilee, and some of them said, I don't know. If you could just give us a sign or something that you're the Christ. If you go through any doubts or questions, give yourself a break. These very disciples in the very presence of Jesus. So the Jews gathered, just tell us plainly. And Jesus said, I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness. But you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. There's the line again. There's the line again. Are you in or out? My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life. They shall never perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. Oh boy, and then, if you had any doubt whatsoever up to this point, verse 30, underlined, highlighted, I and the Father are one. Boom. Drop the mic. I think we've mentioned this before, but this whole sentence, this paragraph right here, if Drew were to say this on Sunday morning during worship, I give you eternal life. If you follow me, you shall not perish. No one of you shall be snatched from my hand. The Father and I are one. Here is where it's truly crossing that line that, as C.S. Lewis says, he's either a crazy man or he's a bold-faced liar. Or what's the third one?
Lord.
No, there's one before that. Oh, lunatic. That's the
Lunatic,
first
liar,
one.
lunatic, and Lord.
Lunatic, mad, crazy lunatic, or he's a liar, or he's Lord. There are no other options here. So people today who say, I really like Jesus. I think that he was a great teacher. I think he told us wonderful things about how to get along with each other and how to care for each other. I really respect and trust and honor Jesus as a great teacher. Again, if Drew on Sunday morning were to say these lines here, the Father and I are one, if you follow me, I'll give you eternal life, none of us would say, you know, except for that crazy talk. He's a great teacher,
Right.
and he's got some great things to say about how to get along. No, you throw out the whole baby in the bathwater. Either a lunatic or a liar or Lord. And that's exactly where the people end up. Verse 31, the Jews take up stones, again, even though it's against Roman law, they are so compelled, so incensed, that they're ready to kill him right then and there. But Jesus answered, oh, this is what you were getting at earlier before. I have shown you many good works from the Father, for which of these are going to stone me? So you don't stone people for healing the sick. You don't stone people for giving people sight. Why do they want to stone him? Blasphemy. Blasphemy. And again, we mentioned, if Jesus weren't who he claimed to be, he should have been stoned. He should have been stoned. Because he clearly equated himself with God. The Jews answered, we stone you for no good works, but for blasphemy. Because you, a man, make yourself into God. And Jesus said, isn't it written? I said, you are gods. We called them gods to whom the world God came to. This gets a little confusing here. Now he's just debating some semantics here about what it means to blaspheme. You're blaspheming because I said I am the Son of God. If I'm not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. Again, they tried to arrest him, but they couldn't. This is also very important in John's Gospel. Jesus said it this way in Matthew, you will know them by what?
Fruit.
By the fruit. Jesus is getting at the same thing here. Don't just trust my words. Anybody can say anything. But it is the works that I do. That's why John talks about the signs and the wonders. They don't just point to Jesus as a miracle worker. They point beyond Jesus to who he is. So don't just listen to the works. Look at the works that he does.
Jesus was a champion at walking a fine line.
Between what and what, Ed?
Keeping himself from getting killed. And teaching the word.
That's true. Well, you want Lazarus, the best story in the whole...
I'll start it. I wanted to, this is something I'd never noticed at the end of 10. This passage had never spoken to me before the way it did when I was just reading through it. When Jesus, after he finishes this exchange with the Jews in the temple, I love that in verse 40, he goes back to across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days. You know, because what happened to him there? That was where he was baptized. And we talked a few weeks ago in one of the sermons, I think Pastor Melody preached about how that moment when Jesus is called the beloved, you know, that really is the foundation of his whole ministry, that he's grounded there. So in the midst of this conflict, in the midst of all these hurtful things that are swirling around him with people trying to stone him, etc., where does Jesus do? He goes back to the place of intimacy with the Father. And you think about what are those places in your life where maybe it's the church you grew up in, maybe it's a camp or an outdoor ministry, maybe it's a mountaintop where the Holy Spirit moved in your life. What would it what does that do for you to go back to those physical places and be reminded of who God truly is for you? I love that Jesus seems to do that there.
We should take it down to like 16 or something.
Okay, all right. The first half of John's gospel, you can roughly divide it into two halves. The first half, chapters 1 through 10, are sometimes called the book of signs. The book of signs. John's not referring to them as miracles so much as signs that Jesus does. And then the latter half of John's gospel, which we're transitioning to now, is oftentimes referred to as the book of glory. That now Jesus is not going to be doing the signs so much. Stop for the last and the greatest one that they're all building to is in 11. But from 12 on is where you get the book of glory. So this is the last sign, the greatest sign. And for something that Christians have wondered for centuries, it's only referred to in John's gospel. How good is it to have a home, a place where you can be refreshed and restored? Think about the smells of home and the comforts that you go on a trip and there's nothing like sleeping in your own bed. You come back home. Jesus didn't have a home. Remember, he says the foxes have holes, the birds have nests, but I have nowhere to lay my head. But in a way, he did. In a way, he had the home of Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And they were such dear friends, they were more like family to him. So he would often go to Bethany, as close to Jerusalem, the village of Mary and Martha, and would stay with them. So their home really had been his home. And this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with their hair. So we hear about them in multiple stories. Mary and Martha arguing over, she's not helping with the work, and I'm having to do all the work in the kitchen. And Mary, the one that anoints Jesus' feet as a sign of love. We don't hear as much about Lazarus until this story. But he is one of the dear, dear friends of Christ. And the message comes to him, Lord, the one you love, the one you care about so intimately, he's like a brother to you, is sick. We don't know what it is. We don't know what the condition was, but Jesus gets this. And a lot of times people have compared this to prayer. Think about the prayers going up to Christ. Lord, the one you love is sick. Help them. How often have people prayed, Lord, bring that healing? Pastor Scott in his sermon on Sunday, Pastor Tim Keller talking about people with terminal illness or just really severe illness, praying for that healing. Well, why is it not happening now? And seeing this request of Martha and Mary is very much like a prayer coming to him. But when he hears this, Jesus says, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory. Sounds a lot like John 9 with the man born blind, that God's Son may be glorified through it. In other words, Jesus, could he have gone and healed him? Could he? Well, we're going to find out later. By this point, Jesus was already dead. Because when he gets there, after waiting 2 days, we're told Lazarus already been in the tomb for 4 days. So the message had taken a while to get there. Why might Jesus have waited if he's already dead, not going right away, even at 2 days? I think he wants to show he's really, truly dead. He's not resuscitating him. There is no way after 4 days that Lazarus could have still been alive in this tomb. He is truly dead. So he waits 2 days because he's going to show his glory through this. Jesus loved Martha. John wants us to know that there's that depth of relationship. Yet when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days. Then he said to the disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, a short while ago, the Jews tried to stone you there. Yet you want to go back? Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Yes, there are. Of course, that's the answer. Jesus saying, again, I'm in control of time. There's just enough time for me to do what I've been sent to do. A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It's when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. That theme of light and darkness present in almost every story here. After he had said this, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. Here again, Jesus talking about X asleep, and they're thinking over here. And so he's going to have to connect it again. You see this again and again and again. Lord, if he's asleep, he'll get better.
Yep.
Let's break this down, guys. Jesus was speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. What's the greatest treasure? It is this faith. You know, as great and as powerful as Jesus, if he had gone right away, if he had still been alive and would have driven out this illness, that would have been powerful. But the greatest treasure Jesus is imparting, he's trying to give, he wants to give all of us, is this gift of believing. And that's another big theme in John's gospel, is all of this is so that you may believe, and in believing have life by trusting him. But Thomas, called Didymus, who often gets this terrible reputation because he's the doubter, Thomas was evidently a complex person, because he's not just timid, wringing his hands, questioning everything. He's bold at the same time. Unless you hear this as sarcastic, but Thomas says, okay, let us also go that we may die with him. Some hear that as him saying sarcastically, all right, I guess we're going to die too, let's go. I've never heard it that way. I think Thomas meant we're gonna be by his side. We're gonna go down with him. He's committed to Jesus at this point, and so they go to Bethany.
What I love about this is that in verse 9 here, Jesus gets very philosophical. Aren't there 12 hours in the day? If one walks in the day, he doesn't stumble and sees a light to the world. You walk in the day. He spoke about my Lazarus is fallen asleep. Then the disciples was, if he's asleep, he's going to wake up again. And then it says, after this soliloquy of beautiful words, finally Jesus says, Lazarus is dead. Right. How much more do I have to nail that thing home? Now I'm going to look at this, that 16. Let us go that we may die with him. I don't know. You know, the great thing about John is that you can insert any kind of emotion into that.
Right.
Because remember, they were saying, we're not going to go there. They just had death threats against us. They wanted to stone you just moments ago. And so either it is sarcasm there, you know, or maybe resign. All right, let's go. And we're going to get killed. I mean, we escaped last time, but we'll die. Or is maybe faithfulness? We're going to go by our side. It's hard telling. Hard telling. Now, when Jesus came and found Lazarus in the tomb, he'd been dead 4 days. As they say in the South, he was good and dead. He was good and dead. This is not CPR. This is not, 30 compressions and 2 breaths or whatever it takes to get the person back. 4 days. Remember how long Jesus was dead? 3 days. 3 days was considered the amount of time that the spirit left the body. So even Jesus dead was good and dead. Lazarus was 1 day further. So Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles. Oh, come on. He could have gotten there. 2 miles. And the Jews, when they came to Martha and Mary to console them, verse 20. When Martha, of course, remember, Martha was the busy one. She was the action person. She didn't wait around for Jesus to come to her. Verse 20, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out and met him. Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, all right, we talked about emotions here. With what emotion did Thomas say, yeah, let's go there, we're gonna die with him too? We have to insert some different emotions here. What's one possible emotion that Martha had?
Anger.
Anger. Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother was not have died. What else?
Disappointment.
Yeah.
Disappointment.
Yeah.
Lord, if you'd have been here, but you weren't, you would have died. What else?
Pastor, could it have been that he was thinking of what his own mother would be doing when he was dying on a cross?
So maybe
Yeah.
it's sadness, huh? Maybe sadness. Between the tears and the sobbing, Mom would say, Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother would not have died. You can insert a half a dozen different emotions into this. And each one would have been our reaction if we had had this brother. Yeah, got a little feedback. There it is. That's probably better. Thanks, Renato. Each one are legitimate, real emotions. What do you say at a funeral? If anybody should know what to say at a funeral, it should be Jesus, right? But when we go to a funeral, what are some of the dumb things that we say? Oh, he looks so natural. Looks like he's sleeping. No, I've seen sleeping people before. That corpse does not look like it's sleeping.
He's in a better place.
He's in a better place. There.
God needed another angel.
God needed another angel. All things work for the good, but those who love him. Went through that text. A lot of people don't know what to say at a funeral. And so oftentimes we don't say anything. If anybody ought to know what to say at a funeral, it better be Jesus, right? Let's see what Jesus says at a funeral. 23, Jesus said, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, oh, now we have to add the emotion again. With what emotion did Martha say this when Jesus said, your brother will rise again? It could be that she hears this as that platitude, he's in a better place, and she'll say, oh yeah, I know he's going to rise again the last day. Or it could be that Martha is just not buying it. That she heard it her whole life in Sunday school. It just says, oh yeah, I heard that one. That he's going to rise again. The problem is he's not here right now with us having dinner. I don't care he's going to rise one day. I want him right here, right now. 25, Jesus said to her, I am, there it is again. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, though they die, yet shall they live. Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. A great phrase. This is what Jesus says at the funeral. But then he asks a very personal question. A question that each one of us has to answer at some point in our lives. Do you believe this? It's no longer theoretical. It's no longer somebody else. It's no longer a Sunday school lesson or a sermon. Now it's real. Because the corpse is lying not too far away. Do you believe this? And she says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world. Good answer, right? The right answer. When she had said this, she went in and called her sister Mary and said quietly, the teacher is here and he's calling for you. And though she heard it, she arose quickly. And when she heard it, she went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were in the house consoling her, Mary rose quickly, went out, followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb. All right, so Mary's asking the same question. This time she falls at his feet. Probably not anger here. Probably that deep grief and sadness. And between her sobs, Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother would not have died. So it's the same one, the same question that her sister asks. So when Jesus sees her weeping, and the Jews who came also saw her weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and truth and troubled. Where have you laid him? They said. Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept. Why did Jesus weep? Jesus knows how the story ends. Jesus knows what he's about to do. Jesus knows that death has no power over Lazarus and no power over Jesus. Why did Jesus weep?
I'm thinking to show or model his love. He was deeply grieved and wanted them to know that he loved Lazarus.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think it's because he saw that Mary was so upset. So it was, that someone he cared about was so upset, and that moved him.
That's good.
I think maybe he was disappointed in the women because they showed a lack of faith.
Empathy, maybe empathy. It could be that Jesus hates death. Death is that ultimate enemy. Death is that enemy that steals away another birthday, another anniversary, another hug. Death is that enemy that destroys families, rips us apart. The only thing that Jesus came to destroy the power of death. And everything in Jesus probably hates death. Because what it does to people, what he saw it did to Mary and to Martha and the community. For all those reasons, Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible.
Sorry, good trivia question.
Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was cave and stone, and Jesus said, take the stone away. And Martha, being the practical one, of course, Jesus, it's been 4 days. It's going to smell. And Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you would believe, you'll see the glory of God? And they took the stone away. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you hear me always, but I have said this in the account of the people standing here, that they may believe that you have sent me. And I love 41. I imagine this on the resurrection of the last day for all of us, when he calls us by name. You know? Dave, get up! Kathy, stand up! Ed, get out of the tomb! Tim, rise up! I mean, I just kind of see this as the resurrection here, in which there is a force behind those names. He calls us by name. And the force is death has no power over you. Get up. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with bandages, feet wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said, unbind him and let him go. Get rid of the grave cloths. The grave cloths no longer can hold him back, neither can the tomb. It's a precursor, of course, for Jesus' own resurrection, right?
Scott,
Yeah.
it's Catherine. I remember hearing the teaching that this was equated with community, because Lazarus wouldn't have been able to bust out of those wrappings by himself. Jesus had said, take them off and let him go. He needed help.
Community steps in.
Mhm.
Okay. You know what makes Jesus unique? It is not the fact that he was a healer. There were other healers during this time. It wasn't the fact that he was a wise teacher. There were other good teachers at this time. It was also not the fact that he rose from the dead. There were other people who rose from the dead. Jesus rose, the centurion or the guy's son, and Tabitha. As it is from the dead. What makes us unique? It's the fact that he is without sin. All 613 laws that Drew referred to, the one without sin, and that made him the perfect sacrifice, the fulfillment of the law completely. And in his death then, his resurrection comes to extend that same gift to all. That's what makes Jesus unique. Certainly the Son of God and God's own Son, but as an extension as the sinlessness. Lazarus supposedly died again. And supposedly this time stayed in the tomb, though he rose again on the last day. Jesus, however, rises and stays there. Anything else?
Yeah, I was going to mention, Drew, I don't know if I heard a while ago, you were talking about the difference between Jesus and Christ. I always considered that to be Jesus was his given name and Christ was his title.
Right, absolutely, yep. The Greek version of that, the Christos is the Greek title, absolutely. Yeah, Yeshua, good point. And I think because of him being both Jesus and Christ, because he bears that uniqueness, here's the offensive thing today. When you tell people Jesus is God, okay, all right, you Christians believe that, or I can take it or leave it. But here's the and because he is God, he has to have total claim over your life. He can't be sort of cafeteria Christianity where you take parts that you like and that you don't like. It's either all or nothing, and that's the part today that's offensive, I think. Going back to the idea of freedom, that Christianity proclaims that if you want true freedom, there's no other way to find it but then to center your life around him. And that's the part I think that's really demanding, and it's also the most hopeful.
Yeah. Okay, let's close in prayer.
And Scott, the one absolutely worst thing I've heard at a funeral is, why did God take this person from me? How many times have you heard that?
Well, it's a natural question about thinking that a person's been ripped from our arms. Yeah, let's close in prayer. Gracious God, your word is a living word that continues to speak to us today, and you continue to open up insights into your word, Lord. Let it sink deeply into our hearts, that it may live out in our lives. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.